Welcome to Exploring Santa Cruz. You are listening to KSQD Radio, 90.7 FM, and streaming on the web at ksqd.org. I'm your host, Jean Kratzer, and my guest today is Dr. Caroline Casey. Caroline Casey is a researcher at the UCSC Pinniped Lab, based at the Long Marine Laboratory here in Santa Cruz. Caroline is conducting ongoing research into the acoustic, visual, and seismic signals used by male northern elephant seals during intense competitive interactions in the course of the breeding season. Caroline is interested in expanding and refining classic studies of communication in elephant seals, including those conducted 40-plus years ago by UCSC's own researchers. And this work has resulted in some surprising conclusions. So welcome, Caroline. We're very pleased to have you here. Caroline, that was a rather daunting description that we gave of the work that you're doing. I found something that is actually a quote that you gave. I'm not quite sure where it came from. You said that your work is on bioacoustics and animal behavior, and that you want to explore the awesome lives of seals through science and storytelling. That sounds fantastic. So what I'm going to ask you is, you work at the Pinniped Lab. Can you just start by telling us what a pinniped is?
Sure, yeah. So I work with Dr. Colleen Reichmuth at the Pinniped Lab through UC Santa Cruz, and together we have been exploring the social and acoustic lives of seals for a long time. A pinniped, pinna means feathered, and ped means foot in Latin. So they're feather-footed marine mammals that make their lives in the sea and also give birth occasionally on land. And so they're amphibious in that they can survive both on land and underwater. So they're pretty incredible. And they include seals, sea lions, and also walruses.
But they have feathers on their feet?
Yeah, right. They have actually bones similar to our hands in their front and back flippers, and they look sort of like wings. I guess early explorers sort of describe them that way, but they are in fact kind of like flippers for those of you that have seen them in the wild.
Okay, and why are they called elephant seals?
Great question. I can't be certain because I wasn't there when they were named, but presumably because of their long noses that males have specifically, were probably similar to some people as elephant trunks. And so they probably called them elephant seals for ease. And also they're quite large like elephants. Yes,
they are large. Could you give us an idea of how large they are? Because it is quite extraordinary.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The males can weigh up to 4,000 pounds. I don't have a good reference for that. I mean, it's as big as a VW bug, for example. When they stand up, they can stand up to 7 or 8 feet tall in the air. So they're towering above me, certainly. The females are less than that, right? So they may weigh maybe 1,000 pounds, probably a little bit less than that.
Wow.
Yes. They're quite large. They're actually the biggest of all the seals, aside from southern elephant seals. And so they're up there in terms of their size among seal species.
I want to get into the details of your research because it's fascinating. But first, I want to ask you if, again, for people that are not familiar with elephant seals, even though the elephant seals are not far from us, they're only at Año Nuevo, which is just down the road. But for those people who haven't seen them yet, could you describe a year's cycle of the way they come and go? When I began to look into this and look at some of the videos, I very quickly got the feeling that what we were doing was looking at some kind of a play, and that the comings and the goings, the entrances and exits were all really well defined.
Yeah, it is kind of like a play. And I would say that, first of all, we're lucky to even see them because elephant seals actually spend up to 80% of their lives at sea swimming. So they come back to shore twice a year. The first time is during the summer. They come back during the summer months to haul out, and they molt, which means that they get rid of their fur, and even in this species, their skin, the upper layer of their epidermis. They haul out into these big piles on land and molt their skin and fur, and then go back out to sea on an incredible foraging migration. The males will go up to the Aleutian Islands, and the females will go out kind of towards Hawaii in the Pacific. And they'll be at sea all the way until about December. The males are the first to arrive back. And this is breeding season. This is when the scene is really set for these guys and when the competition really starts. So the males will begin to arrive in December prior to any females, and they will often fight with one another as soon as they get there before any females arrive.
And why do they do that?
Well, because they like to monopolize the females when they get there. So unlike some species like birds, who there's one male and one female and they mate and they raise one offspring, because females haul out on land in big groups, males can defend them in a way that excludes other males from being able to have any type of breeding opportunities. And so there'll be one dominant male, we call the alpha, who will have up to 100 females at one time. And
like a harem.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we call them. And so they have to fight in order to determine who gets those harems, because not everybody does, but everybody wants one. And so when they're fighting in the beginning of the season, they're establishing and working out their dominance hierarchies. And then from there, the females arrive once that's sort of worked out, and they haul out on the beaches, and they arrive pregnant, and they give birth usually to a single pup. And
they arrive pregnant before they've met the males.
Yes, they're actually carrying the offspring of the male whom they mated with the previous year. Yes. Yeah. So they give birth about within a week of arriving, and then they nurse their pup for a period of about 24 to 30 days or so. That pup gets huge. It quadruples in size, and she decreases in size substantially. And then right before she leaves, the males, that's their prime time to mate. And it actually is happening this week around Valentine's Day, is peak breeding activity at Año Nuevo.
How appropriate.
I know, it's very romantic. And then the females go back out to sea, and the males soon there follow after every single female has left. They forage again. They go on a second big migration, and then they come back to molt in the summer. So that's kind of a day, or I guess a year in the life of an elephant seal.
Why do the males go in one direction and the females go in a completely different direction?
Great question. Some females go where males go and some males go where females go, but generally you have this kind of separation in terms of foraging. There's been lots of ideas put out about why they might do that. The prey quality might be different in those different areas. And one person, Dr. Bernie LeBoeuf, who was a researcher at UC Santa Cruz, proposed that perhaps males go up to the Aleutian Islands because the food's better, but it's also more dangerous. And so they're willing to incur the cost of going someplace more dangerous, where they're likely to encounter more sharks and killer whales, which are the two main predators of elephant seals, because there's such a pressure for them to become big quick. So they'll go and get the better food, but then there's always a risk of being eaten. Whereas females probably want to keep it safe because they're in it for the long run. And so they might go someplace where the food maybe isn't as high as the quality, but they're more likely to survive. And again, that hasn't really been explicitly tested, but that's our best hypothesis.
And when the females go off, is it like what we see with whales, that the female has her offspring with her and is looking after them, or is it different?
No, it's different. She kind of leaves and her pup is still on shore. So this pup, who's extremely fat and vulnerable, sits on shore and gets together with other groups of, we call them weaners, animals that have recently been weaned, and they form these weaner pods, and then they stay on shore for about a month. And during that time, they cruise around the beaches together, and they learn how to dive, and they learn how to kind of operate together. And then at a certain point, they all go on their first foraging migration, and they go out into the ocean, probably to be picked off by great white sharks pretty quickly. Less than 50% of the pups born within a given year actually come back the following year. So there's a really high mortality rate within that first year of life.
And they have no protection and no one teaching them. They just have to learn on their own.
They do it all on their own, which is pretty incredible. And we don't know how they know where to go or how they figure out how to find food. How do they get back to the same breeding beaches? It's all a mystery at this point.
That is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And when they're out there, when the males, for example, are in the Aleutian Islands and the females are off to the west, maybe in Hawaii, are they one big group acting together?
We don't think so. We think that they're in isolation, that they're spending months by themselves, diving continuously while at sea. They are one of the deepest diving marine mammals. So they're up there with some animals like beaked whales that can dive over a mile deep in the ocean. We think that they're eating things like cephalopods, like squid. But yeah, they're generally thought to not be in large groups, but by themselves during that time.
And yet when they're on land, they're all in huge groups, crawling all over each other.
Exactly. They're very gregarious when they get back to shore, especially during the molt. And then during the breeding season, things shift and males are much less tolerant of one another. But the females likely haul out because it's safer to be in a group on shore, especially, back before we hunted all of the predators into extinction. It was probably better to be in a large group versus be by yourself in solitary.
That reminds me, just tell us in a few words the history of the seals? Because we nearly had them go extinct, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, they're a conservation success story. They were pretty prolific. Before the 1800s, they were found all along the California coast, up to Oregon and south in Mexico. And then over a period of about 100 years, they were completely decimated by sealers who hunted them for their oil. After we hunted all the whales to extinction, we decided to go after elephant seals, which were actually quite profitable, being easy to approach and kill, unfortunately. So over the span of, I would say, 75 years, we went from, probably over 300,000 animals down to, we think, less than 20 individuals that were found down in Mexico. And then we proceeded to kill those individuals. And then from there, somehow a few animals survived. And so the whole population today is really from just a handful of animals. So they're very genetically limited. They've gone through an extreme genetic bottleneck because of that.
And what is more or less the numbers that we have today?
Yeah, we think they're probably around 250,000 or so. The last estimate was around 210, but they're increasing at certain sites and decreasing at others. So they're probably around carrying capacity or the population sort of threshold for the species, I would think.
Very interesting story, very different from the others that we've been hearing.
Yeah.
So let's turn to your research. Your research focuses on the signals, the calls, the vocalizations of the males. First of all, how did you get into that research? And tell us what you're doing with it and the significance of it.
Well, I think for any listener who's gone to Año Nuevo, as you step out of your car, you don't see the elephant seals, you don't smell them, hopefully, but you can hear them. So the first thing that I experienced when I went to Año Nuevo was their sounds, and they produce some really incredible and interesting sounds. And if I was sitting on the bluffs kind of watching these animals, you notice that the males specifically are producing these incredible signals that are really loud pulses, sort of like a drum beat. And they make them in the context of aggressive encounters with one another. So two males will face off against each other. One male will sit up into this very tall posture and emit this loud vocalization. And then the other individual will run away, or he'll decide to attack. So clearly there was some interesting information, some pertinent information being exchanged between males. And so I just wanted to figure out what they were saying to each other. And 6 years later, myself and our colleagues, I think, have gotten down to that, at least among the male elephant seals.
And what is the information that they're communicating?
Yeah, so each male, adult male northern elephant seal produces its own unique drum beat. They basically serve more or less as a name. One individual will vocalize and produce its signature call, and the other individual will decide to respond based on his previous interactions with that individual. So, for example, if you and I were facing off and I said my name, Carolyn, and you had fought with me before, you would remember my name and what had happened. Maybe I beat you up and say, I don't really want to mess with Carolyn today. Or alternatively, I know that call and I beat that individual up before and I'm going to go after her because she's likely to lose. So during a time where they're fasting while they're on shore, so they're not going out and eating while they're breeding, they're really just conserving their energy, not having any access to food or water, it's incredibly important not to exert too much energy too soon. And so this is a way of minimizing risk of energy and expending too much energy by calling and communicating with one another to resolve these conflicts between individual males.
Why don't we listen to some of these males? Because you were kind enough to send me 3 examples. So we'll just listen to them one after the other, and you can comment and tell us what we're hearing and what it signifies.
Sure thing.
So here's number 1. That does sound like a drum. Is he saying anything about I'm big and scary?
Sadly, no. I mean, he is big and scary. That's a call from an animal named 3C, one of our favorites. Actually, we have a lot of favorites, but 3C was one of our favorites. He was an alpha for 3 years in a row. So he was able to maintain a harem of females 3 consecutive years. His call was really staccato, and you could recognize it based on his slow pulse rate like that. And so it's really the tempo of the call and the rate at which those pulses are emitted that are characteristic of the individual.
Okay, let's listen to number 2. That sounds like a motorcycle to me.
Yeah, they've been compared to Harley Davidsons before. So that's another strong adult male named 10A that we tracked, and he actually had one of the biggest groups of females at Año Nuevo for that year. And you might have noticed that he doesn't have any silence in his call. It's just a kind of a continuous burping sound, and that's how I remembered who he was.
And now, number 3. That kind of sounds like a motorcycle that won't start, or a drain that's clogged and doesn't want to drain.
I think it sounds beautiful. Yeah, that's another adult male named 2S. What I like about his call is that it's sort of like a doublet, it goes bump, 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 bump. So we can really take these small characteristics of their call. And when we get onto the beach, we got to a certain point where we could listen to a male and before checking his ID, know who that individual was. So they were recognizable to us. And so that helped us to kind of decide what type of experiments to do to determine whether they were recognizable to other male elephant seals.
And by now, there's thousands of these calls if every single male has a different one.
Yeah, so every male, at least at Año Nuevo that we've measured, has a call that is dissimilar to other individuals. So males are able to keep track of their competitors based on these differences. And so one male, for example, might be operating in an area where there's maybe 25 to 35 other adult males. And so theoretically, that male can memorize and remember those calls of every single individual and the consequences of what happened during previous fights, which is pretty incredible feat. I mean, it's hard for us to remember 40 names of animals or individuals that we've met before. So elephant seals are capable of doing it too.
That suggests significant intelligence.
They're very good at solving the problems that present themselves to them in their environment, in their social environment. They're very good at what they do. And I think with most animals, when you look carefully, are incredibly intelligent in that they're able to solve a suite of problems based on what they're encountering in their natural world.
Weren't you working on the basis of earlier research that didn't talk about these as individual IDs, but thought that there were dialects in different groups?
Yeah, so UC Santa Cruz has a long history of doing elephant seal research at Año Nuevo. Año Nuevo was one of the first sites that was recolonized after the species was hunted to near extinction. And so the first pups were born in the early 1960s. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Bernie LeBoeuf did research there, and he recorded elephant seals too in the 1960s. And he found that elephant seals at Año Nuevo all sounded identical to each other. There was no differences. Then he traveled to San Nicolas Island and San Miguel Island and the Channel Islands, and also to an island in Mexico, and found that animals at those sites all sounded similar to one another too within the colony, but very different between colonies. And so when you have regional differences in vocal behavior between populations that don't intersect, that's what's called a dialect. So an English accent versus, a New Zealand versus an American. They all had accents, but very different from what we found today. And it was very surprising. And I had to talk to Bernie about these results because I was not convinced and just found it to be really strange.
What is the explanation for the change having taken place?
Well, I went back and retraced Bernie's footsteps and went to all the same colonies and re-recorded them, and also got all of his old reel-to-reel data and converted it and reanalyzed it myself. And sure enough, there's been this dramatic change over the course of the past 50 years. And likely the most likely explanation is a combination of factors. There's more immigration and emigration between sites. And so males are shifting and moving around as the population expands, and they're probably bringing new dialects to new areas. You know how New York is a melting pot of different accents and individuals. It's probably something similar. But now also the stakes are a lot higher. There's more males, so more competition. So if you're living in an area when you're, during the 1960s and there's only 5 other males there, everybody can kind of sound similar to one another or have a name that sounds similar because there's only 5 males to keep track of. But if you're living in a big colony and now all of a sudden there's 50, well, you better have names that are dissimilar so you don't make any mistakes. And so not everybody can be named Brad or Sam or something short. It's better to have more complex calls. And so that increased competition likely selected for a diversification in calls among males at these sites. And also time. It's had to take some time to develop too.
When there's a fight going on, Are all the other males watching to see who wins and remembering who won?
Such a good question. We don't know for sure. We haven't tested that, but it'd be surprising if they didn't. I mean, these males are so observant. When you watch them, their eyes are constantly moving and they're always watching one another. And you would think that any information that would potentially be helpful for them in decision making, they're going to take advantage of. So in other species, they've shown that animals are able to adjust their behavior based on the outcome of interactions of other individuals that they're not directly interacting with. So it's likely that elephant seals are doing this as well, but I still need to work that out.
You have many years of research ahead of you.
I hope so.
And when this fight is going on, is the harem left unprotected? And does that give rise to some taking advantage?
It's like watching a soap opera, really, when you're out there. I mean, so these fights, I'll mention, they're really prevalent at the beginning of the season. And then most of the interactions between individuals are resolved through the exchange of calls for the rest of the season. So they're quite rare. But say, for instance, females have to leave the harem eventually, right? They're going down. They have to go to the ocean. An alpha doesn't want to leave his female vulnerable. He wants to be the last individual to mate with that female. And so sometimes males will escort their female from their harem all the way down to the water line and then keep away all the other males that are lurking in the tidal line waiting for their one opportunity to mate with that female, which they might not get. However, that leaves his harem incredibly vulnerable to other individual males that are waiting to infiltrate that. So it's really a game of decision making for that alpha. Do you stick with your female and fend off all the other males, leaving your harem vulnerable, or do you just let her go and see what happens? But it can be incredibly dangerous for these females if they're not protected during that time. And we've seen, unfortunately, some females die as a result of aggressive males who are fighting over her for access to breeding opportunities.
Wow. And all this time, if I've understood it correctly, neither the males nor the females have eaten or drunk anything. So they must be getting weaker and weaker.
Yeah, by the end, we call them a sack of potatoes. They just have like loose skin and they've lost an incredible amount of body weight over that period of time. And I was out yesterday and all the animals just look exhausted. And so you really have to feel quite bad for them. They need to get back out to sea to eat again.
What about the pups then?
And the pups, are with their moms and they have a difficult life as well ahead of them. During their time with mom, if they stay close to her, then they'll do well, and she will nurse him or her. But if they get too far away, say a big wave comes in or there's a storm or there's a male that runs through the harem and separates them, sometimes it can be difficult for the mom and pup to reunite. And other females will sometimes try to steal the pups of other females, especially if they haven't pupped themselves. So I think that there's so much hormone energy going on for females that if they're waiting to give birth and there's a female who's subordinate to her, they'll sometimes vocalize that and steal the pup of another individual, which isn't good. No. And then a pup that's lost its mom is so vulnerable. I mean, other females will sometimes attack that pup. Seagulls will take advantage of pups that are alone, and it's not a good outlook for them. So the goal of the pup is to stay as close to mom as possible throughout the duration of the lactation period.
Doesn't actually sound like it's much fun to me.
No, it's really hard. That's why males, for example, only live to be about 14 years old. Females live longer, up to 20, but life is hard for elephant seals. They're one of the most extreme animals on the planet. They're some of the deepest divers. They go on the longest foraging migrations, and they have the most extreme breeding system with respect to competition of any mammal. So they're living in a life of extremes, which makes them so interesting to study. But at the same time, you really have to feel for them because you're in the life of an elephant seal is quite difficult. And when we see the males that we've been tracking for 5 years come back every year, it's just such a win for them to survive from one year to the next, and we celebrate them and we're so excited to see them again.
Absolutely an amazing story.
Yeah, they're great.
And tell me, what are the key things that you have not yet been able to explain that you want to direct your research towards now?
So many. The problem with research, or the benefit, depending on who you talk to, is as soon as you close one door on a research question, 5 more open. So right now what we're doing is we know a lot about the calls produced by adult males, but we don't know how those calls develop over the lifetime of an individual. What are young males doing? What does it take in order to become an alpha animal, and what type of social interactions do these young guys have with other individuals on the colony. So we're tagging and tracking young guys and following them throughout their reproductive development, which is very time intensive but extremely rewarding. And some other questions, what's up with the nose? Why do they have such a big nose? Why do males have a nose, and what does it do? Is it helpful during sound production? That's a question I have. And also with respect to their memory, are these dominance hierarchies maintained between seasons? Can they remember the calls of their most familiar rivals the next year when they show up on the breeding colony, or are things sort of reset at the beginning of each breeding season? So those are 3 of the many things that I'm interested in exploring with these guys.
And one other fact that I remember reading, is it true that their calls are amongst the loudest in the world?
Yes, my colleague Brandon Southall, myself, and Colleen and a few others just published a paper, and they are one of the loudest mammalian vocalizations in air produced by any animal.
Louder than elephants?
Louder than elephants, louder than bison, louder than lions.
Louder than howler monkeys?
Louder than howler monkeys, yeah. If you get close, they're very impulsive, right? So it's like hitting 2 huge... I don't know the right words. It's like hitting 2 pieces of metal together incredibly fast and incredibly hard for a short period of time. So yes, they're loud, but they're not continuously loud. They're sort of impulsively loud.
We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time. But boy, we could go on talking about this.
I sure could, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming, Carolyn, and for sharing all of this with us. And for those who were lucky enough to be there, this past weekend was at the Seymour Center Elephant Seal Weekend.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you still have time to check out the elephant seals at Año Nuevo. So if you haven't seen them yet, go up and see them.
Okay. And I'm sorry I'm going to have to cut this off because we've run out of time. You're listening to K-Squid. This is KSQD Santa Cruz. And coming up next, the Tom Hartman Show.